Show me the money.
All right now.
I would. I
You
was
know, I'm
waiting
from
for it.
Louisiana. I'm from Louisiana. You got to watch. You start with "show me," and the way that sentence. It's not
I.
even carnival, man.
This is definitely not carnival or carnival, whatever you want to call it. It's not Mardi Gras. We are talking dollar bills. That's what we're talking
There
about.
we go. Yeah, make it rain.
We can do a little bit of this. So yeah, anyone who is new to this cluster, I am Matt, and this is Precious. We are a show called Sell Like a CPCU. We're put on by members of the agent and broker interest group, and we talk about tips, tricks, sales techniques, hacks, all kinds of good stuff to make you a better salesperson, and or if you want to become a salesperson. So, what are we talking about? Oh, actually, like usual, I don't want to forget this one. Like, comment, subscribe, share, notification bell, hit the retweet, get this out there, help share this with insurance pros that can use the information. So, we are talking about getting paid. That's what we're talking about.
Pain.
Yes.
Money.
Do you have a love-hate relationship with talking about producer compensation structures?
Oh yes. This is what keeps many an agency principal or sales manager awake at night, trying to figure out how much is enough, how much is, when does it become motivational, when does it become a crutch. Yep, so this is a target that is constantly moving.
Yeah, and we kind of brushed on this. Who were we talking to when we brushed on this a little bit when we were talking to? Was it Meg? It might have been Meg that we were
I think
talking.
so. Mhm.
Yeah, and we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to expand on it a little bit because I think a lot of folks, one, they get into this thinking of like, there's only a couple of different ways to kind of, for lack of a better phrase, like split the baby in terms of compensation. And then I think a lot of folks, like, they don't even really kind of think about it. I think it's just maybe they came from a certain environment and the compensation was structured a certain way and they were like, oh, well, it worked in that environment, so I might as well not, upset the apple cart or anything like that. And there are some industry standards, but, those industry standards have been there for decades. And so, I think we've also seen some agencies get really creative with their compensation structures in the past. So we can kind of like talk through the different variations and things like that, but kind of like philosophically, where do you come at it from? Like, what is your philosophy in terms of how you're going to approach or look at, one or a standard producer compensation kind of structure?
So I guess from a high level philosophical, if I have to wax poetic here, uh, any sort of sales job has got to be paid for performance. There's really not a whole lot. It's not the activity that matters, it's the result. It's the sale, And so it differs obviously from a model where you're talking about maybe like in underwriting or in claims where, you have certain tasks. And as long as you move through those tasks, your compensation is based on your productivity from that standpoint. Sales, if you're really efficient, you don't have to have as many tasks in order to get to the same number of binds. And conversely, if you just are terrible at it, you can put in a whole lot of sweat equity and get very little yield. And so there's a certain temperament that is absolutely necessary. And in order to incentivize a sales team, it has got to be leveraged so that, better outcomes, translate to, better revenue.
Yeah. And so would you say that a standard across your entire sales team makes sense? Or are you in favor of kind of like tailoring the compensation structure by individual?
Kind of a hybrid model. So I do fully expect that someone who's got, there's a little bit of a ramp up. If someone's new to the organization, if someone's new to the industry, you have to set goals, achievable
Hmm.
goals, because I also feel like sometimes when goals are too far away, they just come across as unrealistic and people stop shooting for them. So I wouldn't expect an amateur to be able to jump right into the Olympics. So
Yeah.
you have to be able to beat your personal best. So there's a piece of that that says, the only person you're in competition with is self. As long as
Hmm.
you're tracking upward, as long as you're continually improving, that should be the goal coming right out of the gate. And I
Yeah.
think excuse me, where a lot of people get distracted is looking at what's going on, to the left or to the right. When you run the race and you're in your lane, you just have to be eyes forward, figuring out how you can continue to build and improve upon what you're doing. Now, with that being said, I think that any organization ought to have some benchmarks that, again, are a compilation of a lot of different elements, right?
Mm.
So, how many opportunities are they getting? Access to market, because, for example, if you're an organization that has both company generated and self generated leads, unless you're really effective at marketing, you may not be getting as many at bats because you just don't have enough people to pitch to,
Right.
versus somebody else that may have a well established, machine of referrals that's just cranking out, and a lot of today's binds, because it's the sowing and harvesting, right? Today's binds very rarely are from opportunities that materialize today. Oftentimes what you're looking at is the end result of a process that could have been weeks or months or years prior. So to immediately clean slate, new year, treat all your salespeople as if they're on even keel, sometimes that's an oversimplification that really just defeats morale.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm definitely in favor of like a core being standard, and then having something that having some leeway to be able to customize it. Because to your point, you know, just I can tell you from personal experience working in the public sector, with only two real big X dates during the year, and just the nature of public sector business. I mean, you could go a year without even really getting a
Mhm.
ton of decent sized opportunities. And then one year you could just run a table and just blow things out of the water. And so, to that point, like it does depend on the markets that you have to work with. It depends on the industry or the target market that you're going after. Again, whether you're green or you're experienced, and if you have a brand, like a personal brand in the market space
Mhm.
already, versus you have to build it from the ground up. So yeah, all of that has to be factored into the overall compensation structure. So let's talk like at the very base of the base of the base. All right. Does it make sense to have like, or let me say, what are the situations in which it makes sense to have either a pure base salary, or and these are kind of like apples and oranges, or a draw?
Okay. I think that, what I've seen traditionally is that if someone is in a training period, so training period means that they don't even have any opportunities to close deals. This is pure onboarding training. So whether it
Hmm.
be the first 6 weeks, 6 months, whatever it is, makes sense for the position. During that time, typically you're not in a commission type environment, so your compensation is normally pretty flat.
Hmm.
So most places will say that we pay, the equivalent of X number of dollars an hour, X number, dollars a year, so while you're in that sandbox.
Yeah.
And then when you come out of that sandbox, that's where the fork in the road is on, how do you continue to be able to eat? Because let's just be completely honest.
Yeah.
If you have someone who's working for your organization and they just can't make it make sense, then that's going to either put a whole lot of pressure, and they're going to have to decide really quickly if this is for them. Right.
Right.
And so also understanding the length of time in your sales cycle.
Mm.
So if it's reasonable that on average it takes 4 weeks for a deal to close, well, that first 4 weeks out of the gate, they literally had no opportunity to sell. Right.
Yeah.
And so you may want to extend either, kind of a floor or a draw or something so that they can continue to make ends meet until they actually have their first opportunity for business to start closing.
Yeah.
Now, once they start closing, that's where you start getting into what are the overall targeted earnings. And so, when you're talking to someone who's weighing an opportunity and you explain to them, on average, someone with your, skill set, with the opportunities that we're giving you at the markets that you have access to, our typical salesperson is able to close around this much business.
Mhm.
You kind of self-assess where you think you fall compared to typical. Are you above average? Are you below average? And then what we'll do is we'll figure out a way to kind of levelize the earnings so
Yeah.
that you don't have these, peaks and valleys. And so, in a draw, because there's, again, even going down that tangent, there's a forgivable draw,
Mhm.
there's a non-forgivable draw, right? And so I guess I'll pick one, again, piece within that as we're going down these rabbit holes here.
Mhm.
So I've seen models where the expectation, we're just going to use flat numbers for illustration. I'm not hiring at these numbers. Sold! Going to work for
Trisha
her.
said she was going to pay me X.
Promise me these numbers. So we'll use 3,000. Okay.
Yeah.
So the goal is, so if you're selling X number of premium that yields, 3,000, if you don't hit the at least 3,000, we're going to make sure that you take home at least 3,000. Then the following month, anything that you write in excess of that will go to pay back, what you've drawn before. Because that's another thing with draw. Is it all immediately repayable? Or are you willing to kind of stretch that out where a certain percentage, is it the overflow goes to repay it? Is it, requisite amount? So this is typically where the accounting piece can get really complicated. And so I will definitely say, and I had that conversation earlier this week, I thought naively that going into agency ownership, that the most difficult thing to do would be to close sales, right? And make transactional business. But I have been worn out. End of month, beginning of month, closing books, accounts payable, accounts receivable, fighting for every dollar, hey, we got this and we expected that. Hey, where's the bookkeeping is a beast.
Yeah.
I'm preaching to the choir here.
Yeah.
And so that's another consideration too. And then I'll stop. If you make it some sort of long algebraic equation for people to figure out what they're going to take home, you're also creating a monster to keep up with on the back end in terms of the bookkeeping. So make sure that it's transparent, that everyone agrees on the terms before the game starts, and that it's something that you can actually track, because there's just that bad feeling when someone feels like they're either, mostly if they feel like they're being underpaid.
Yeah, like, or not just underpaid, but like they got screwed out of something, right? Like, oh, I should have gotten this, but I got it taken off, or I didn't qualify or something. Yes, yeah, all of that. My first impression when you said self-assess, are you better or like average or whatever? My first thought is like every single type A producer is going to be like, oh, I'm the best. I'm the best. Yeah, make it really aggressive. I'll sell it all. But yeah, so all of that is completely on point. I would say, in addition to that, a situation where you're working off a draw maybe doesn't make like, this isn't like an absolute, but just from my perspective, it makes more sense in a scenario where you have an agency that's kind of like actively at least able to feed the producer some leads, right? If the producer is meant to just like hunt and kill on their own without any lead sources or anything like that, sometimes a draw isn't it can smooth things out a little bit. But truthfully, I would actually prefer a different model, which we can talk about in a little bit. But, a draw is an okay option, but the problem is that you could have a really good producer that then hits a cliff where if they do go through like, even just 1 month of a dry spell, that could be it. And then they're like, okay, well then what am I working for next month or whatever, or if they can't make bills 1 month, are they now having to go and get hourly work somewhere? So that does make a bit of a difference, where it's a little bit easier to kind of work off of a draw if you're being fed opportunities, because then it's just a matter of whether or not you can close. And if you can close, you'll be able to make up your draw, and at least you won't starve. And then if you could generate additional on top of that, then fantastic. My other thought is, as far as like the base pay versus or like salary versus draw, I would agree with you. That training period, there should be some kind of stipend. I mean, like you're almost
Mhm.
being treated like an intern or something, right?
Agreed.
So everyone should basically get a stipend. Um, I actually found what did kind of work well when I was at Brown and Brown was they did kind of a step down salary.
Mhm.
So it wasn't necessarily a draw, but it was,
A
the
diminishing
first
base. Mhm.
the first 6 months you were paid at this level, the second 6 months, and then so on for like the first 2 years,
Mhm.
with the goal being that at the end of 2 years, you should be at the point where you're pretty much 100% on commission.
Yep, paying for your seat. Mhm.
Yes, yeah, and there's some kickers and stuff like that, and like as a sales manager, to like you were talking about, oh well, are you against yourself, or are you against others and stuff like that? The sales manager can liven it up and put like a prize pool in there where
Yeah.
total number of opportunities, total amount of closed business, or total number of closes, all of that can get some extra cash. Brown and Brown, what they were really good at was they would make cash lays, like Hawaiian lays. They
Yes.
would they would make them out of $100 bills and give them to the producers when they hit some kind of metric or something like that.
Mhm.
And so it made some pomp and circumstance out of it too as well, which was fun. But yeah, I actually liked that setup of their compensation structure, where it was that kind of like gradual step down over time, and it was because the producers were pretty much on their own to generate their own leads, close their own business. And so that kind of really worked for that because it gave a little bit of a safety net. And it allows you to plan too. So, like,
Mhm.
if you have an opportunity, this is something else that I think agency principals need to understand. And if they've been a salesperson, I think they kind of get this. If you have a compensation plan that is going to fall off really quickly, you're going to chase all of the business that you can think you can close quickly. And you're
Mhm.
not going to spend very much time on that kind of like long-term sales process
Right.
because, like we said before, you could starve for 6 months before you actually end up getting the business. And so that will change also your producer's behavior.
Mhm.
So that's a big thing. Like whatever you want to get out of your sales team, you should be contemplating that in terms of the compensation structure, because if you compensate short term, you're going to get people that just go after low hanging fruit.
Oh yeah.
If you only compensate, I don't even know how one would do this, but if you only compensate, kind of like whale type business, like big accounts, right? You're going to have a bunch of people that don't write anything for a while because they're chasing huge accounts. So that is something that you have to keep in mind as an agency principal. Where are you at on base salaries? Do you think base salaries are actually a good thing, or have you ever always thought that it just attracts people who, what's the buzz phrase? Like, don't have an entrepreneurial spirit, would you say?
Oh, that's right up there with like artisanal and other overused words that just
Oh,
drive me
yes.
crazy.
Are you a
Um,
self starter, right? Like,
oh my gosh, that was a hard eye roll. Um, Um, it's always interesting because it goes back, and I guess this is my pre-insurance life when I was in hospitality.
yeah,
Okay, and so the rule of thumb when it came to tip earning employees, so specifically wait staff in a restaurant, is that if they made enough in wages to surpass the minimum wage, then we paid them what we call servers minimum wage, which in most states is like $2, right?
yeah,
And basically all that became was just fodder for taxes to come out of, and you
sure.
would just get a stub that just showed nothing due instead of an actual paycheck. Now if it were extremely slow, there wasn't enough business that day or whatever the shift happens to be, then if they fall below that threshold, labor laws say that you have to compensate them to whatever minimum wage was,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
And so it kind of fluctuated because at the end of the day they showed up, they did a thing, right? So there was some activity, and there ought to be some compensation for said activity, right?
yeah.
And so that's kind of the thought process with some of the salary base is that if, first of all, if you have like a hybrid role, because I've led teams that have been primarily account managers, but they also have a duty or mandate to round out and to cross sell. And so you have to be able to carve out what piece of their compensation is to do what,
Right.
because they do some of the transactional CSR type stuff, endorsements, cancellations, whatever, and so it can't all be in this one bucket of, we can't pay them as if all they did was sell if
Yeah.
they're doing other things for your agency, And so also when you start getting into certain cusps and tiers and niche markets and you require the assistance of skilled, experienced personnel, it's going to be really difficult to bring them in if there's no pay, because basically what you're paying for at that point is their knowledge and their expertise,
Yeah.
right? Now, of course, we all hope that that lends towards their ability to close. I brought you in because you know the space, because you're supposed to know how to get things done in this space. So yeah, there are certain situations, especially right now, where I don't think it's any secret, insurance including, that it's an employee's market. There's a
Yeah.
labor shortage, there's a knowledge shortage, between the retirement of the generation that's exiting, this talent vacuum. I mean, I can just go on and on and on about how you need to be able to retain, excuse me, quality employees, because that's also another thing from a agency branding standpoint. If you have high turnover,
Hmm.
that's also sometimes going to hurt you when someone is reaching out to do business with you, because
Yep.
they're inevitably going to assume that there's something going wrong, and they assume that this poor decision making is going to permeate into other areas of how you do business. Are you just a crap employer, excuse me,
Yeah.
or does that also mean that you're not that great of an agency as well? And so you
Hmm.
got to figure out a way to help people learn how they're going to be able to grow with you.
Yeah.
So with that being said, I'm a firm believer that, the whole concept of upside, right? So this is your break, anything below this threshold, you're almost in probationary land, right? It can't go on that way.
Yeah.
Anything within this next tier, this is your reasonable service. This is the break even, right? You didn't do anything spectacular, but you're not on the hot list anymore of,
Mm.
your next not across the chopping block. And then now this is the sweet spot where if you get here, now there's, some sort of multiplier, there's some sort of kicker, there's some sort of something that's going to make it worth your while. So not only is your guaranteed comp going to be prettier once you get
Hmm.
here, but we're also going to lace it with all these other things to encourage that behavior. Because to your point earlier, whatever you incentivize is how you're going to impact behaviors. And so oftentimes, like you said, if there's some sort of cutoff, then you're subconsciously encouraging sandbagging. Right.
Hmm.
So if
Yep.
I know that I had to close 10 deals to secure my job for this month, and I have 2 more that I can probably pull out, but it's the last week, those are going to be June binds.
Yeah.
I probably could have got it done right now. But again, if you're pitching it and you're making them feel like it's some sort of, game that they have to manipulate their numbers,
Hmm.
people are really adept at being, survivalists. That's what we do.
Yep.
So you have to make sure that it makes sense and that it's encouraging and incentivizing the right behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. No. That's right on point. And so, one of the things that you do have to navigate is if you're breeding complacency amongst the folks that you're bringing in that are supposed to be these, again, the hunter gatherer types, right? Like, you don't want to be incentivizing complacency. And at the same time, to your point, in terms of like caps and things like that, you want to not just incentivize, but you want to hyper incentivize people to go above and beyond.
Hmm.
So I mean, like if there's absolutely no additional benefit to selling that extra policy, closing that extra piece of business, I mean, you're going to get what you get, which is pretty much almost none of that, right? Like that behavior won't be prized by the individual. I can tell you, as someone who operated a P&L with a sales team attached to it, a lot of times we would sandbag or not sandbag based off of how we were doing. Because there wasn't very much of a benefit to like completely blow the numbers out of the water.
Hmm.
And so, if we had a growth rate for the quarter of, +4, we were doing really good compared to all the other units that were out there.
Hmm.
If we had the opportunity to book something for that quarter or hold it over until the next one, and I already know I have +4, I'm going to take the +4 and I'm going to book that for the next quarter because I might not be at +4 next quarter.
Right.
So all of those things really kind of like go into that either conscious or subconscious thought process of the producers or even the sales manager, if they have some kind of skin in the game as far as the production goes. New versus renewal. Where do you sit on like like does it make sense to have kind of like that stair step model or that like step down model that a lot of agencies have out there? Some of them it's the same. Some of them it's actually inverted, which is crazy. Like where they get like
Mhm.
you get a kicker for renewal versus and a lot of that has to do with I think your expense structure. But where do you kind of fall on that philosophical dilemma there?
So, that all goes back to in the cost of acquisition, right?
Hmm.
For the agency. And so we understand that, part of that acquisition cost, in addition to our marketing efforts and that sort of thing, is agent compensation, producer compensation.
Yep.
And so all of that's, front loaded typically. Of course, the goal is, we need it on the books for a certain number of years in order for us to kind of, break even and for it to become, more stable and actually cross over into profitable.
Yep.
That was one of the things that we all, had to remember for, CPCU is, that first year, that policy is a liability. It's not an
Yep.
asset yet because you've got
Yep.
all of these acquisition costs tied to it. Now, when it comes to compensation, normally, if you're receiving some sort of base, some sort of salary from the agency, then that base and that salary is basically paid out of the renewal revenue from their book of business. So
Yep.
it's understood that you have your base, you get paid a first year commission on any newly placed business, but you have no claim to renewals because that's basically where your salary is being paid out of. Right. So there's that school of thought. Like I said earlier, when I was managing a team of account managers of kind of this hybrid that we needed, we wanted account managers that also sold. Right.
Mhm.
And so the way that we compensated them from a bonus structure or commission structure was really the growth or the attrition of their assigned book of business. So if you have a $2 million written premium book of business that you're responsible for,
Mm.
understanding that the typical attrition in that space was 15%, that meant 85% was basically break even. No
Mhm.
harm, no foul. We're actually paying you for losing business, but we know that loss of business is inevitable. People retire, buildings get sold, life happens, right? So
Right.
attrition in the business is not to be, it's not unexpected. However, if you overcame the deficit, so the way we structured it at that time was if 85% was break even, once you surpassed 90, then you started getting into bonus ability range.
Mm.
Sometimes that 90 happened because you rounded out accounts, right? And so sometimes that 90 happened because the renewal premiums increased.
Right.
Whatever the driving force behind that increase wasn't part of the calculation. We were just looking at how much premium is enforced. Did it move up or did it move down? And then we had different tiers. So if you hit 90, 95, 100, 105, whatever the case is, we, gave a certain percentage in terms of a bonus.
Yep.
So that also made them a little bit more mindful of writing quality businesses that was going to stick, business that was stable, because unfortunately you find that dynamic in a lot of agencies where the producers are just slinging anything, they're binding anything at the pulse.
Yep.
Did your
Yeah.
credit card clear? As long as your down payment's received, it doesn't even matter to me if you could afford the policy long term. I just had to get you out of the gate the first 30 days. And after that, you're the agency's headache, right?
Yep.
But if you're also responsible for sticking with it, then it makes you look at it, a little different. So I
Yep.
do think that there should be some skin in the game for again recognizing that you're writing good business, that we're helping the agency or the organization grow as a whole, but in terms of getting first year dollars every year, it's normally either you're
Mhm.
not getting a base because your renewals become your base, or if you're getting a base you're not entitled to second third year renewals.
Yeah. Yeah. it is, and again, this is obviously dependent upon what type of business you're going after and the environment you work in. I think the difference between new and renewal is also really important when you look at, say, like a younger producer versus an older producer. So if you're hell bent on growth, right? Like you want to continue to grow, and you want to, you want to incentivize the young producers to grow their book. Obviously, that new business commission, if there's a little bit of a bump or a kicker, it can be very beneficial, especially if they're responsible for generating the majority of their own leads, right? And so, once that producer starts to mature, once they get to the point where they have an established book of business and things like that, and the renewal business does become, the main part of their compensation, you then run into this dynamic where if you keep that difference between, new and renewal, a producer that has an established brand, whose book of business kind of like throws off business just by itself, could get into the situation where they're like, I'm not really going to fight to hold on to that account very much because I can always just go write this other account over here. Yeah, and to your point in terms of like the cost of acquisition and stuff, I mean, obviously the new account is less profitable than the account that you hold on to. And so if you have to also balance that, because once a producer becomes established, there needs to be something else, right? It could be a stock bonus program. It can be, just straight cash bonuses for retention levels and stuff like that. But so it also makes a big difference. I mean, like you were talking about a team, a service team that's basically handling, a book of business, and also that dynamic is important because if you have a situation where the producer is still first point of contact, quarterbacking a lot of what's going on, including renewals, then you're going to want to incentivize that producer more on those renewals than in a situation where, like you said, the producer's like, all right, first 30, 60 days, it's been bound, it's now on the service team's hands, I'm off to the next deal. That kind of situation, you're going to de-emphasize that renewal piece and maybe thicken the compensation a little bit for the service team on that in that scenario than the actual producer on a commission-based basis. So yeah, like all that's really kind of dynamic based off of what the business is that you're writing and stuff like that. There's also seasonality to look into. Like certain seasons are just highly active in terms of new business and things like that, or renewal business for certain sectors. And so that also can have a dynamic where, I mean, hell, if the person works in a sector that has one or two heavy times and then the rest is kind of like down times, like maybe you even have kind of like that time-based component there where you're going to incentivize them to write stuff to round out their book throughout the year during the time periods when they're not that active, that's always something where it's like, and here's the other dynamic is this is also like you talked about, this is kind of a recruiting tool too, like a hiring tool. And so you do have to keep tabs on who your competitors are and what they're offering as well.
Absolutely.
Because look, I'm going to discover, I can say this because I'm a producer. Producers in a lot of cases are dumb, okay? They will look at a commission structure and they'll be like, okay, 30 and 30 or 40 and 20, right? Like, and a lot of them will be like, well, hell, I want the 40 because I want to be hit on the front end for it. Yeah. Exactly, right? Like, and not many of them are going to do any kind of calculation or time value of money or anything like that. Like, they don't care about that. Or, young producers. And again, I was one at one point in time. I was dumb when I was a young producer. I would look at that and be like, I want the 40 on the front end because I have no money right now. Yeah. Right? But they miss out on the fact that 10 points on a, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million book of business is a serious amount of money every single year. But if you forego that by going with a different offer, So there's an education process too. Like
Oh yeah.
your sales manager and your HR team have to be really on point teaching these producers about like, look, this is what you're giving up if you go over here versus come here. And so you really have to keep that in mind as well. What are some of the fun things that you can build in? Like, like
So I've seen
commission's great, but
yeah, some really interesting, yeah, and it depends on the dynamic of your team, your agency, the environment, right?
yeah.
And so, I've been in, a sales center where, one of our, company values was we win together, right?
Mm.
And so we had department goals. And so we had some really, lofty goals, but if everybody kind of hunkered down and got it done, then there was something that was either a celebration, so we'd buy a lunch or throw a party or something. And, we got one of those hokey thermometers and put it in the front of the aisle so you can kind of see percent to goal. Where are you?
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Also have done things like, for example, recognizing that there's a different level of difficulty sometimes in closing certain products, right?
Mm.
A general liability policy, you really don't have to explain or sell the need for that. People either need it and they know it or they don't. But for example, an EPL close, might require a little bit more finesse than an auto close because you got your kind of compulsory stuff and then the more proactive stuff. And so
Yep.
I've been in environments where maybe we were really pushing cyber that quarter, and so for every cyber bind you got a ticket in a raffle. Really to kind of drive that and push that. And then something else that, again, everyone has their side of the fence. I'm curious where you sit with that too, is oftentimes your carriers may have some sort of promos. And so I've worked in environments where if the carrier had a promo, I let the promo pass through. So if they got a spin on a wheel, a little bonus or whatever, then we would just basically give that over to the employee. I've been in places where that sort of thing is not really disclosed, and so they just consider that agency money when it comes in. But using your, because a lot of times when we talk about comp, we're assuming that it's something we're taking out of our pocket to give.
Right.
But there may be other sources for this stuff. And employees, to your earlier point, sometimes the recognition or the simple stuff, the swag, oh man, I wrote this much and they sent me an umbrella and they're so psyched about this umbrella. I can go to Five Below and get an umbrella. But
oh my God, the traveler's umbrella every year. It was like, did you get an umbrella? I got an umbrella. Yeah.
It's bragging rights,
totally.
man. You can't buy it from the store. You're like, hey, I got this. This is a badge of honor that says that, I did the requisite stuff, so I get the hat, I get the koozie, I have the pen, I have the lapel pin, whatever, but using that to, sweeten the pot, I'm a firm believer in.
Yeah. So the carrier thing, I was always extremely wary of because, being an independent agent, the last thing you need is some even like rumor that you're playing favorites and placing business with a carrier because of a promotion or something like that.
Okay.
So that's something that the multiple stops along the way, I have always kind of run into that, and I can tell you that from my perspective, I wouldn't even tell them about the promo. If they did get something if they did get something from the carrier or something like that, I would rather they have gotten it because they unknowingly, placed business with that carrier or something like that. When it comes to producers themselves, it depends. For the service team is one thing, right? Like the service team, I would actually, I'm a big proponent of incentivizing the service team because I really think they're the sales force that everyone forgets about, basically.
Yes.
And so, whatever you can do, like if a carrier offered some kind of giveaway for like a trip or something like that, I would ask for something else. I would ask for departmental lunch or I would, ask for like a cash kicker or something like that, especially if it's like, if you have a team sales environment where it's like, one person binds it, but you have 3 or 4 people who touch the account. I mean, that's another dynamic too, is, who gets the trip, so to speak, right? And so that always, like, I would say whatever, there's no like one answer on that one. But I would say whatever answer you do choose, understand that you need to be extremely wary that you're not, allowing folks to be incentivized to just direct business to a carrier because of the promotion. Um,
Agreed. Now,
yeah, it's
I've never been on the level where they were giving trips. I was talking about, like little cheesy points to an
yeah.
online catalog.
Well, wholesalers are big for that. The catalog thing's fine. I'm like, look, if you're gonna direct business to a carrier because you get a little tchotchke or something like that, I mean, come on, like,
Well,
yeah,
see,
you
and
get,
that's usually, the same rule of thumb, as far as like rebating and things like that.
yeah,
I don't think it was necessarily to, like you said, sway them to place business somewhere. Oftentimes, we would see stuff like that, especially if it was one of several appointments that we have,
mm,
and maybe their portal is a little bit more challenging, and, just for whatever reason, people aren't trying them enough,
yeah,
then you have these little things that just kind of help them, with rapport building or relationship building. But yeah, you shouldn't be, bought by, a happy hour that they throw,
yeah,
quarterly.
yeah.
I get
I
that. And of course, just to be clear, I'm not referring to the contingency money either.
mhm.
So if you have contingency money, for hitting goals or maintaining, then that's not necessarily something that passes through. I'm just talking about the little spiffs, the little
Yeah,
gift cards, the scratch offs, or whatever it is, sometimes that come that way, and putting that in the pool. So we had done this really cool promotion when I was, again, leading the team of account managers, and we would try to come up with different things monthly, right? So I
yeah,
think it was March or April, baseball season. So we built out like this little, baseball diamond, and, depending on how many binds, you kind of ran the bases, and, each base had like, some little hokey. Okay, we had like a gift room, kind of
yeah,
reminded me of like the old school. What was it? Wheel of Fortune, I think, used to do it. One of those shows where you're like, okay, this gets you a ticket to the gift room. So you get to walk in there, like Dave and Buster's, pick out whatever you can that, and we would just have stuff laid out, right? And so that's a lot of times when we would dig into the supply closet and bring out the carrier provided stuff
yeah,
as part of that. So sometimes, again, that's more for, like you were saying earlier, the little fun stuff, the lighthearted stuff. Now, I don't think you're going to be able to take that umbrella to the pawn shop and liquidate it for like, serious cash. I don't think anyone's pressed like that for the logo, but, little throw-ins that you can, kind of add to the pot that don't necessarily have costs.
yeah, yeah. And I have much less of a concern with like more submission based
Hmm.
things like that than I do actual binds, because once you start talking about binds and kind of promos or things like that that are associated with that type of behavior, now you're kind of you're bridging that gap in terms of whether or not you're actually doing it just for the promotion. Wholesalers, actually, I've seen wholesalers give out some, or at least offer to give out some, like kind of like really gaudy kind of things. I mean, like a
Box seat.
cruise,
Yeah.
or like things like that. And so I think from my perspective, especially if it has to do with bound business, I'm more comfortable with doing something where like there's a group benefit for the team.
Hmm.
Again, situation dependent, but a group benefit for the team, like a lunch or something like that, with individual recognition, right?
Hmm.
Like, Sally made this happen. Let's give Sally a round of applause for, whatever, writing, 15 policies with, this carrier this month or this quarter. I really like that. The other thing would be, if you're not necessarily using it as a pass through, but if you have something that's an analogous. So like I've seen in the past where, depending on, like you were talking about lines of business, flood's a big one, because flood, a standard P&C piece of business, you get in between what, 10 and 15 points usually.
Hmm.
Sometimes you get a little bit of a kicker. I mean, hell, flood, you can make 20, 22. I've seen 25% commission on some flood policies. And so maybe you want to incentivize, account rounding and selling flood.
Hmm.
If you want to do that, then, the account managers or even the producers that are writing X number of policies, if they're the best one, or you pay out, 1, 2, and 3, and have a pool of funds, and say the carriers have some kind of incentive that goes along with that, like, maybe it's like you put it into the pool and that becomes part of the prize pool. I'm much more comfortable with that. But yeah, that's
But to
something that I'm
your
really really skeptical about. Yeah.
Yeah, some of the, like you said, the things that can, sway a decision kind of ties into, my next point about cherry picking.
Mm,
I think that's one of those, producer behaviors that most agency principals or managers are trying to figure out, how do you discourage that, right?
mhm.
And so you mentioned something earlier about, renewal money, new business money, as far as the employee is concerned, it's same money, right? So they're
Yeah.
like, hey, a percent's a percent. This is a low hanging fruit. It's easier to get versus this one I'd have to, work a little harder for. And sometimes it's just that transparency and
Yep.
sharing with them that it might be same money for you. It's not same money for us, So to your point, these products, when you look at from a premium dollar perspective, you're not realizing that on the back end of that, there's a sliding scale when it comes to, our commission percentage here.
Yeah.
So even though it's, the same $10,000 bind, $10,000 bound as this versus as that, actually, we there's a difference here.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's any problem in, again, just from the transparency, making sure that they're aware, because otherwise, I mean, who doesn't want low hanging fruit?
Yeah.
If I can fill my basket with the things that, the ones that roll in the door ready to go versus that one that I have to chase. But to, you mentioned it earlier, sowing a seed now knowing that there's going to be a future harvest, is necessary, because those are normally going to be the ones that have a longer, time, so when you talk about the lifetime value of a customer,
Yeah.
that if you're saying with this particular vertical, this particular exposure, this particular type of customer, they tend to hang around at least 5 years, and so over the course of that, we anticipate we would make this much, kind of, again, making it a little bit. And again, this may be an approach that works better in smaller organizations, where you're able to kind of articulate, we grow together.
Yeah.
If you can help us with these things, that helps us become more stable. So long term, if you like working here, helping us stay around, it's a win-win, for everyone involved. So, the producer, I've seen, again, models where if, renewal time comes and if the service team is having difficulty with it reestablishing rapport, contact, stickiness, then they pull in the person who closed the deal.
Mhm.
And if they're able to, get it done, then maybe there's some sort of split, that we can do in that situation, because they had to get involved.
Yeah.
Now certain accounts, you don't have to do that, but, there's always that benefit if you have that person around, because they had whatever personal angle help get it to the closing table. If you're not using all the guns
Oh yeah.
to re-pin it down, then those are missed opportunities. But then you also don't want to come across, because you hear that a lot too, where producers are saying, hey, I'm being pulled into this fire and that fire, and these things aren't revenue generating for me.
Hmm.
What's in it for me to get involved on that if I'm not going to see a dollar of that? And then my last point, you made mention of, focusing on the whales. So, I worked in a strategic partnership where if anything was deemed to be, there was a cutoff, right? So they were trying to discourage their producers from chasing these small opportunities and just to hand those over to the referral partner so they could focus on the larger one. That was the purpose of the partnership. Well, inevitably, they would write it anyway because it was tied to a bigger piece, right?
Yeah.
So you're like, hey, I've had this law firm for years. Their daughter wants to start a popsicle stand. I'm not really a popsicle stand type guy. I'm going to write it. I need to make sure it's done good so she doesn't complain to daddy that we didn't, get her taken care of. So there's related business. There will always be related business.
Yeah.
But what they did after a while was they kind of tightened the belt, and they were like, you can write it if you want to, but if it doesn't net this dollar, you won't get paid a dime on it. So pick and
Yep.
choose if that's still the best use of your time. If you're doing it because you're like, heck yeah, keeping daddy is the best use of my time, do it. But just understand that we're not going to, pay you because you're way too expensive to be chasing minimum premium BOP stuff.
Yep. Yeah. And I think again that also comes down to, your mix, your capabilities. I mean, if you're not a small commercial shop, then you're not going to have the infrastructure and the processes in place to get a lot of profitability out of small commercial.
Mhm.
if you do have the ability to put that in place, small commercial can be extremely profitable,
Hmm.
especially if you have a lot of stuff that are basic. That's basically on, for lack of a better phrase, autopilot, right? And so that being said, it's about whether or not you have the capabilities and like you said, if you're pulling someone away from more gainful activities
Hmm.
in order to do these things because they're still getting incentivized, or there's something else that's kind of amiss. I think something else that's also a touchy subject or not a touchy subject, but one that takes some varied perspectives on handling is this idea of like inherited books of business and things like that.
Hmm.
So a book that you've purchased and the producer didn't come along with it, or even if they did come along with it, you have to navigate whatever that purchase agreement looks like. Or in the situation where you have a succession, where it's a producer that has retired and you have someone taking over, what that compensation structure looks like, or you've bought a book of business and the producer didn't come with it.
Hmm.
So how are you going to incentivize the producer that now you're putting on it to retain that business and stuff? Maybe it's the renewal. Maybe you're flipping the percentage where the renewal percentage is actually higher, year one, year two, while they're reestablishing a new relationship versus new business. And you don't exactly want them chasing new business at 40 points when you have $1.5 million book that you just purchased that could end up getting rated if they don't spend their time on the renewals and reestablishing relationship. So that's all something that. Wait, what about like mentorship, right? So I think we've talked about this in the past, but on the point of producers being pulled in different directions and saying, well, these aren't exactly gainful relationships. How do you effectively incentivize a more seasoned producer to help out a young green producer write business?
So that's always the, sticky conversation among salespeople, right? No one's going to tell you the ingredients in their secret sauce.
Mm,
But here's the thing, and I kind of equate it to, again, like the Food Network, like Chopped, right? You all get the same
yeah.
like basket, and each of you are tasked with turning out, a dish, and no one's going to have the same dish. I can
Mm,
give you strategy. I can tell you how I do what I do. You're not going to pull it off the exact same way that I do.
right.
So if it's something where I can just show you best practices, how to navigate a conversation, like what we do on this show, we come together and we just talk about things that we've personally witnessed, success in implementing. That's where, again, if you have the right culture of we grow together, this is for the good of everyone, and you're able to explain that, the more hands that we have on board who are able to execute on it successfully, then it helps us with our agency's image as being, a permanent fixture in this space that, helps with those sort of things. A lot of that sort of mentorship, just like we experience with any other mentorship relationship, you can have formal mentorships, you can have long term, short term. I
Mm,
have found that, of course, pre COVID, we're still navigating how to do that now. That even, I don't want to use the word osmosis, but being in proximity
yeah.
helps,
Yeah.
right? Because you'll hear someone on the phone and you'll hear that they have like a really slick way of overcoming an objection or explaining a coverage. You're like, man, I'm all left feet when it comes to that. Like I've just heard them really summarize it in like three sentences, and I'm sitting here like, once upon a time there was a mama policy and a daddy policy. And you're like, look, didn't even have to say all that. And you sit there, you just say, boom, this is what it does, and you're like, psh, mind blown.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, if you're even remote, right? So
Yeah.
if you have the opportunity where you're like, oh, I'm getting ready to make a really great call, Matt, are you available? I'm going to kind of bring you in here so that you can kind of just listen in. I'm not even going to disclose you're on the line, but hey, I'm getting ready to pitch, I'm getting ready to close, I'm getting ready to do this, and I think that it's worth the ride along,
Yeah.
to do those. Or if you're in a more structured environment where you're like, hey, we're screening calls, we found this one that was just like a classic, textbook case, can we share that? So there's got to be some of that. How do we recycle and extract these best practices and these successes so that we can continue to perpetuate it? Because we all know, regardless of how well we do, that our careers are finite. So
Yeah.
if we can help the next, round of folks coming through to find similar success, it just really helps. It's a win-win. I'm hard pressed making a case against helping somebody else.
Yeah. Now, and I'm torn because in some cases, it just seems like that those folks should have a professional commitment to, helping others in the organization, just as, kind of a good steward of the industry. But at the same time, I'm like, you can't necessarily assume that they're going to, have the same commitment or even the ability, right? Like, I mean, say it's a producer who's seasoned, but they are literally running around like a chicken with their head cut off all year long because of their type of book of business or something. You can't reasonably expect them to drop things and then work with someone to teach them the ropes. I think it does help when there is at least the opportunity for some kind of commission split there. And again, I'm torn as far as whether or not it makes sense to standardize the commission split, or you leave it up to like an organic negotiation amongst the producers. I think you do have to keep tabs on it if you are going to kind of leave it like to be an open playing field, though, because two things can happen. One, the more seasoned producer can exert their leverage on the younger producer and overpower them to the point where there's an imbalance of benefit. And then the other aspect of it is just the ridiculous complexity, like, oh, well, I worked on it, so I get 5%, and John worked on it, so he gets 3.5%, and, Susie gets 2.5%. Like, no, come on. It's like, two people max, right? Like, I don't want to see 15 names on the commission split on a policy.
Exactly.
So, and really that comes from, I mean, my time when I was at Prudential, you would negotiate it up front. It's almost like a co-broker agreement, right?
Yes.
Like you'd negotiate it up front, and it was very much a not a dedicated, but a semi-monogamous relationship between the new producer and the more seasoned producer, where it's like, look, I will work with you. Let's lay out the ground rules ahead of time, and this is what this is going to look like. And we'll try and do this for a while, so that you're not necessarily also having a young producer like ping pong between 5 different producers with 5 different commission
Styles.
splits and everything
yeah.
like that. Yeah. There's some good there. There's can also be a lot of bad if you have someone spread too thin or taking too much input from all these different directions. It can create a tornado where the person doesn't exactly know which way is up.
Exactly.
So, but yeah, that's always been something where it's like, and you get in a big enough of an agency, and I don't envy agency principals in a big agency where they have a ton of successful brokers, and it's like, well, this is my area of the industry, and Mike went in and wrote this piece of business, and he knows that I do this, and so I deserve half of the commission. And you're like, did you call the people? No. Did you work with Mike on it and give him any pointers? No. Did Mike do all the work on it? Yes. So why are we having this conversation? Oh, but you don't understand. That's my corner
turf.
of the world. Like, yeah, exactly, right? The reason why Mike was able to do it was because my book of business allows us to have these carrier appointments, right? Like and so agency principals, I mean, that's the one thing that I noticed where I was lucky to not be in that position with, within a larger agency, because that stuff is like, oh man, that is
hairy.
like, oh, and I, especially when it's like the big producers, because those egos, man, holy cow, they could fill a room just by themselves.
You don't say.
Oh man, I went to an annual meeting once for the company where one of the producers was just raising hell because his room wasn't ready, and he showed up like 3 hours early, right? Like, so, and it was like, I get it, like, you make a lot of money and stuff like that, but at the same time, I mean, like, come on, there's some practicality here in how we're supposed to relate to people, but yeah, no, that is an unenviable position. Look, we're going an hour. I didn't even think we would talk this long about this, but There's so many rabbit holes you can go down with this
So
topic
much
too.
good stuff. Oh yeah, we'll have to
Yeah.
revisit this definitely with a guest, and I want to hear some real life feedback on how others, have executed, because it's a very treacherous path, and leaning too far to the left or to the right could be the difference between having happy, thriving, sales force or not.
Yep.
So it's
Yeah.
important to discuss.
Or even we didn't even talk about like switching it up, right? Like
Oh,
you acquire an office, and then all of a sudden all of the producers are used to getting one thing, and you're like, all right, well now you got to deal
oh,
with this.
revamping a plan is akin to a root canal. Been
Yeah.
there. It is not.
Without any Novocaine.
It is not the party you want, but it's
Yeah.
necessary sometimes. You got to break the bone to reset and cast it right. It's for the long term good, but that is so, because especially if you have legacy employees versus new ones that didn't even see that old action, the
Yeah.
new ones are usually better adopters. The old, yeah. So
Oh yeah.
that's probably like book worthy. That right there.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I don't think I'll ever do that again on purpose.
I'm sure there are multiple books that could be written from multiple perspectives on that too. So, but no. So, I look a reminder to everyone: if you've made it this far, thank you. Reminder to like, comment, subscribe, share, notification bell, retweet, get it back out there. And we will be back next week. I'm trying to think if we have anyone lined up. We do have a meeting coming up with our production assistant, which is going to be fantastic. So we're going to start to get back to more regularly having some guests and freeing us up to be able to kind of pick the brains of some of the leaders out there in the sales community.
Absolutely.
So that should be good. So any final notes, comments, questions, anything like that, Precious?
Nope. I mean, it's graduation week, I think, in several places across the country. I've got a graduate who walks the stage on Sunday, so we're extremely proud of my oldest daughter graduating from high school. Super excited that thank you. They have opened up, registration for Into Risk, so my ticket is secured. I will be there for sure. Matt, you said you're coming. Hopefully we could probably do something on location, so looking forward to that. But no, it's a holiday weekend, so just be safe, be well, and we'll catch you next time.
Yep. Yeah. I rest and relax, and we're almost halfway through 2021. Holy cow! Like, where did it go? That's insane. That's absolutely insane. But so and this is episode number 26. I actually put it in the title right up there. So
good for you.
We're gonna keep track from here on out. We're gonna get it together. We're working the kinks out. So. But so thank you all for joining us. We appreciate it, and we will be back as usual next week on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central. So everyone have a very good afternoon.
All right, see ya.